Welcome back, everyone. This is remarkably punctual to be on time after the end of lunch. We have a good 90 minutes, I think, if that's correct, for this panel, so we have a fair amount of time to get into some details with a really extraordinary group of speakers. That's really going to be an extension of what we talked about in the morning, getting perspectives from a pretty broad, diverse set of people in terms of where the coal markets are headed. What's the outlook for price, for supply and demand? How are all these things intersecting with each other, and what's driving those? Global trends, domestic trends, policy, changes in the market, changes in substitutes, different kind of fuels, and other shifts in the market. So I'm going to turn first. We'll give each speaker a chance to present for sort of 10 to 12 minutes or so, and then I'll pose a few questions, and then we'll open it up to a conversation with the audience. I will introduce briefly each of our speakers. Our first is going to be Howard Grunspecht. Howard is one of the things I miss most about working in the administration, not only because he is such a mensch,
only because he doesn't.
but because when I used to have a question, any question, I could call Howard up, and he would call me right back and he would answer it. And he knows the answers to every question.
Was it the right answer?
Well, I don't know. And he's been a friend for a long time and always very generous with his time. I've learned a huge amount from Howard. He's the Deputy Administrator of the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the top career official at the agency, has been there since I think 2003, and so is really involved in all aspects of running the Energy Information Administration, the data analytic arm of the U.S. government, analyzing and disseminating independent, impartial energy information, not involved in making policy decisions per se, but providing the information that policymakers need and other people need to do their jobs. Before the EIA, he was at Resources for the Future. He was also in the policy office at the Department of Energy and has a long career being one of the nation's leading energy economists and scholars and analysts. So with that, thank you for traveling from DC, and I'll turn it over to Howard Grunspecht.
Well, good afternoon. While you're working off your lunch, I'd like to thank the Sabin Center and the sponsors and Jason for inviting me to join you today. You know, in Washington, it's often said that kind of where you stand is where you sit in energy. I think it means that energy is a big regional issue more than a political issue, but I'll interpret it a different way. The Energy Information, as Jason said, we're a statistical and analytical agency. We're within the Department of Energy, provide independent and impartial data and analysis. We don't take positions on policy issues, and our information is issued without prior review or approval by the department or other federal agencies. So my comments do not necessarily reflect their views. Jason asked all of us to go short on prepared remarks, reserve the bulk of the time for discussion. You know, they are a great group of panelists here, so I'm going to focus on coal supply and demand in the United States. And we have lots of slides at EIA, but I'm not going to show you that many. So this is, you know, we do a lot of these where you kind of say something about the future, and this session is more about the future, but typically we always show the future in the context of history, because it's pretty important. So coal's share in energy use and its absolute contribution have fallen substantially over the past decade. See that around 2005, if you could imagine it, that black part at the bottom, which is coal, was, you know, a much more substantial part of the energy picture than it is today, where that line is, sort of a definition of today, being 2015. And it's fallen off, especially in the past few years. You know, EIA's first administrator noted when pressed at a Senate hearing to skip the caveats and get to the facts. His name was Lincoln Moses. What a great name. His middle name should have been God. But he said there are no facts about the future, and there aren't. So all projections, the ones you saw this morning and ours, you know, they're not facts. However, you know, EIA reference case projections, which are designed to reflect current laws and regulations, including the Clean Power Plan that is currently on hold, pending court review. I guess this is the law schools associated with this as well, so you know more about that than I do. Envision a continuing decline in coal's role. And you can see that we see coal's share of the overall energy pie really falling rather dramatically. Even in an alternative scenario without the Clean Power Plan, which is like the right-hand, that little separate panel, different future, we didn't repeat history, history's the same. We still think coal's role in the U.S. energy system would decline in both absolute and percentage terms. And then on top of that, looking the other way, given the amount of reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that would be required globally to hold greenhouse atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases to a level that would be consistent with having a reasonable chance of meeting the aspirational objective of limiting average temperature warming to 2 degrees centigrade or lower relative to pre-industrial levels. That's all part of the Paris discussion that occurred last year that you're all familiar with. There is a significant chance that possibility, at least, of additional future policies to further mitigate carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels. And were such policies to be pursued, it would certainly reduce coal's role even further, or I suspect that it would. So, why is that? Why is coal particularly exposed? Because it's both its global and especially domestic use is concentrated in electricity generation, which you heard about this morning, largely, where many alternative sources of low and no emissions generation are available, and also because of its relatively low value in relation to its carbon content. So, as the previous thing showed, over the last decade, coal has lost competitiveness relative to natural gas, even without the added burden of a explicit value on carbon dioxide, which would really disadvantage it relative to natural gas, and also even more so with respect to renewables and other non-carbon, non-fossil fuels. So again, in the United States, over 90% of coal consumed, close to 95, I think, is used in electric power sector, with industrial accounting for all the rest. So as this morning, talking about electricity, worried about coal, talking about electricity makes a fair amount of sense. And so, again, this shows some history of coal generation. Again, it goes all the way back to 1990. You could see I guess in the middle of the first decade of this century, this is about the 21st century, coal was generating almost about 2,000 billion kilowatt hours, but it's fallen off very dramatically since then. Natural gas has risen very dramatically. Renewables are rising. I think it's fair to say. I mean, they're making a bigger impact as a share of capacity than as a share of generation because of their capacity factor being relatively low. They run when the resource is available. And then, so that's history on the left-hand side, to the left of the 2015 line. And then on the right-hand side is a projection going forward, again, in the main graph with the Clean Power Plan. And, we see coal falling off rather dramatically, and that's without any additional policies beyond the Clean Power Plan, which may or may not happen, the additional policies, and the Clean Power Plan itself, I guess. And we have both natural gas and renewables surpassing coal. Again, if the Clean Power Plan doesn't happen, the outlook is a little different. Natural gas, we think, would still surpass coal. Renewables would still grow a lot. A lot of the growth in renewables driven more by tax policy, which has been a key driver of renewables, and also by cost reduction. And some of that was discussed this morning. So, as recently as 2007, coal provided about half of U.S. electricity generation. This year, it's under a third. We actually never had, there was some talk this morning about new coal builds. We haven't had any new coal builds in our forward-looking reference case projections for, I think, at least the last 5 or 6 years. Simply put, really the combination of the high capital costs of building coal in the United States, significant fuel costs. Coal costs something. For a while it was cheaper than natural gas, discussed this morning, but it does cost something. the extra risks inherent in making large new investments in power plants that could be subject in the future to some kind of carbon policy. Again, we don't assume anything about that policy, but people don't go into this with their eyes wide shut. Make new coal generation generally uncompetitive with other available generation sources to serve load growth. And it's also, as discussed this morning, we don't expect a lot of load growth in the US power system. A different story is, so the market for coal in the US and coal plants, in our view, is really existing coal plants and what happens with them. And you know, they only need to recover their going forward costs to remain competitive, and fuel costs are a key component of that. This morning we had a very, what I call a nationalized discussion. And it's very common to do that. I mean, you have short time, you know, you're not gonna get into all this and that. I mean, there was some discussion of individual plants, but in talking about the prices of coal, the prices of natural gas, it was all on a national basis. Natural gas kind of does have a national price, or close to a national price, but coal really doesn't that much. And it's important to recognize the diversity in coal use and coal's competitiveness across US regions. So regional differences in costs, and I think if you think about it, you know, what the pattern is there, they tend to rise with increases in distance from the Powder River Basin, primarily in Wyoming, also a little in Montana, reflect a combination of differences in mine mouth costs across regions, but also transport costs. Transport costs really matter a lot to coal. The delivered cost of coal, in many cases, 2/3 or more of it is transportation, and in the US I'm talking about. And railroads are the primary mode of coal transport, and I think one key question is the extent to which railroads might be willing to lower their coal transport tariffs or rates. Some of these are not tariffs, some of these are just negotiated arrangements, lower the cost to limit the decline in coal use, and there's some anecdotal evidence that this may already be happening. Another shorter term consideration in coal markets arises from temporary disconnects between coal production and consumption as electric generators manage their coal stockpiles. So there's no question that coal use in power plants is down a lot in recent years, but coal production in 2016 has been depressed even further by the fact that electric power plants, you know, have been trying to reduce their stocks of coal, which have kind of grew certainly over the past winter to very high levels, much more than they want to have. So keep in mind, we had a lot of gas generation because gas was really cheap. We also had a very mild winter, which reduced overall winter generation. So these guys came out of the winter with lots of coal on site, and they're trying to get their coal stocks back down to normal levels. So while year-to-date coal generation is down by around 20%, maybe a little bit less as you get the last couple of months in, because it's been really warm, and that's tended to boost electric demand. But probably 20% year-to-date 2016 down versus 2015. But coal production is down 25% because of this effort of the electric generators to kind of purchase less to bring their stockpiles down. So there's some temporary disconnect there. So this is the outlook for, talk a lot about electricity. Very few people talked about coal itself. This is the history and the outlook for coal production in, you know, we tried to summarize it into three main areas. And I think there's a lot in the history and in the projections. You can see that Appalachian coal has really fallen off a lot historically. And, you know, we see it falling off more, but a lot of the decline in Appalachia has already occurred. And the little dotted red area, that's the without the Clean Power Plan. So the Clean Power Plan not making that much difference to Appalachia. We can talk a little bit about it, you know, one, because they've already seen a big reduction, two, because they produce the met coal, metallurgical coal, and that's not related to the Clean Power Plan. So it's that combination. The interior, you know, actually holds up fairly well in our view under the Clean Power Plan. in part because a lot of coal plants have installed pollution control equipment to meet the max rule. There was some discussion of recent coal retirements in that rule. And once you install scrubbers, high sulfur coal is a lot more attractive, especially if it comes from a closer distance. And again, Illinois Basin's a lot closer to where a lot of the coal plants are than the Powder River Basin. So again, it's not something to write home about, and they would do better without the Clean Power Plan. But we see the interior, which is dominated by the Illinois Basin. There are other basins as well, doing relatively well, again, in part because of other regulatory actions that have made that coal more attractive relative to other coal. So we see the big fall off is kind of, in our view, is going to come where the big run up had been in coal, and that's the coal from the west, primarily the Powder River Basin. So again, it's not a well, depends what side of things you're on. Of course, we're not on any side, but it's not a, if you were a coal producer, reasons to be concerned. So coal exports came up a little bit this morning. So here's some historical data. 2012 was really an anomaly. It was very high, 0. I can do it in 2 minutes, which will satisfy Jason. So, this is showing the mix between metallurgical coal and steam coal. Again, the metallurgical coal is used in steelmaking process, kind of a different market than the steam coal that electric utilities buy. And we do see, but keep in mind, you're looking at these numbers. So we happen to have it, in the, in the 70 to 90 kind of range, kind of forever. So I think some of the reasons that were talked about this morning are relevant. I think the met coal market will be there if the steel making, goes on. That depends a lot upon growth in the world. That's a lot of exports of met coal. We don't see giant exports of steam coal, but this is all relatively small potatoes, even when it was super high in 2012 and people were getting excited relative to the domestic consumption. So exports, if you're a producer, is not the answer. And then finally, this is our kind of view of the world. We don't see coal demand globally doing tremendously well. We see it falling off in the United States. We see it falling off in Europe. We see it falling off in, in some sense, in China. We do see there are definitely some increases, in our outlook in India and other places. Again, a lot of this, if you assume the reductions, to limit warming to 2 degrees C, if you added all the INDCs in, the coal thing would actually flatten out even a bit quicker than this. So with that, I am done, and I thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much, Howard. Just a quick follow-up question and then move on to the next speaker. I just want to make sure you said exports were, I think you said small potatoes, so I just want to understand, what, you can sit down if you want, what you meant by that in terms of,
well, I'm saying
the volume is small relative to the total, so whether they go up or down.
Relative to US
do they have a big
production.
impact on revenue? Do they explain the bankruptcies, or even that is not pretty small?
I think, really, so coal consumption domestically has kind of fallen from the, 1,000 million tons or something to 700. That's like, 300 million tons or something, and that's that the whole exports is like typically under 100 million, and a lot of that isn't going away because of the met coal and other things. So I guess what I'm saying is the swing in exports relative to the swing in domestic consumption, which is dominated by the electric power sector, is very small.
So even if that export market turned around,
I don't
and
think
looked
that's
good,
what's
that's not going to
That's
make
not
a big
really
difference.
gonna, unless you're talking about a tripling of exports or something, or, and that's.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
So let's turn next to Tony Yoon, and maybe someone could help get his slides up. Tony leads the gas and power team for city commodities research, also does a lot of other macroeconomic and analysis and strategy work on other commodities like oil and coal. So knows coal well, knows the substitutes for coal well. He's conducted academic research at lots of institutions, worked at McKinsey, worked at Constellation Energy's Global Commodities Group, and is a friend of SEPA as an adjunct faculty member at Columbia. So it's great to have Tony back with us, and we'll turn it over to him for his presentation.
Well, thanks very much for having me and inviting to talk to you about the coal market. And before I talk about this subject, I want to say that I started my career in academia working on emissions issue and was previously a solar engineer. So I really come from the green side. But then as I study more about the subject, about environmental side and the energy side, then there's actually seemingly a mismatch between the policy intentions and where the market is going. So today my presentation is titled Coal, a Duel Between Policy and Markets. So certainly the energy system is supposed to move from fossil fuels to renewables. So we went from the age of wood to coal, and coal is not really going away yet. Age of oil, gas, and of course renewables. It should be coming on, right? And that's, acceleration of renewables is supposed to be dominant. But let's meet reality. So these are 4 graphs, all come from US EIA data. So EIA is very useful. We love that. We love Howard too. Everybody loves Howard. US
Television show.
U.S. coal production, after falling sharply in the last 2 years, is staging a rebound. So if you look at top left graph, that shows you U.S. coal production nationally. So you see the tail end of that. There's a sharp rebound these days. The top right graph shows you the Appalachian coal. Yes, is on a long-term decline, but also rebound. Then if you look at the bottom 2 graphs, Illinois Basin and Wyoming, which is representative of Powder River Basin coal, now coal production levels is back to roughly the 5-year range, right? So, and this comes after 8 months after the Paris Agreement. So if you look at the first half of the year, it looks like, people might see it as a coincidence where, Paris Agreement, and then coal prices coming down, coal production coming down, coal demand coming down. But how now we have production rising. Then if you look at prices, the top 2 graphs shows you the CSX rail coal price, which is Appalachian coal price, and the top right is Powder River Basin coal price, also rebound in the last 2 months. Now, why is that? If you look at the bottom left graph, you see that U.S. coal demand, fluctuate quite a bit, but it's staging a really strong rebound. Well, partly because natural gas price has been rising, the summer's been hot, and then next year, the price rise might be even, on the natural gas side, might be even stronger. So this year, natural gas prices average about in the $2 range. Next year, we expect natural gas price to average in the $3 range. That's a roughly 50% price increase. And to say that what is really driving coal demand to come down, as many of us know, is not only policy, trying to get some of the coal plants to retire, but also really low natural gas prices, really pushing coal plants out. But then now with natural gas prices, after hitting rock bottom, coming back up to in the $3 range, some coal that are able to survive and have the emission abatement equipment installed, they have a lifeline right now. And also another part was that if you look at the bottom right chart, these are comparing the analyzed production of U.S. coal, which is a darker blue line, versus the light blue line, which is a consumption in the electric power sector. The coal production typically is higher than total power consumption of coal, but then this year is different, where the coal production cut early this year was so sharp that now there might be a shortage of coal for now. It seems like producers have been reacting to that. And longer term, so clean power plan, to plan or not to plan, that's the question. So now it's in Supreme Court. But what's interesting is that the US system could mirror what happened in Europe. So what happens is, if you look at these two graphs, the top left graph shows you the top left graph shows you these are all sort of power generation by different fuels in the US. So the top line is coal, it will continue to come down. The middle line is natural gas, which we project to be flat in terms of demand, slightly different from the EIA, because we think that electricity demand growth would be flat to negative. And what is displacing coal on a national system is really on the renewable side. There's a lot of displacement, from renewables to gas to coal and all that, but on the aggregate you have that. But if you, and this case on the top left is with clean power plant, but if you loosen the emission cap slightly, you'll get the case of top right, which is coal consumption can go down in power generation, but natural gas will also come down as well, which is basically the case similar to Europe, where with strong renewables policy and carbon pricing, or at least a carbon trading system, renewables get supported. Coal, because at least for some locations, cheap. So in European sense, coal demand was robust, but gas got left out. So is gas really a strong bridge, a long, sustainable bridge to the future? That's a big question. But what this really shows is that, coal prices, coal for all aspects of coal prices, coal demand, coal production, first half year was declining, now it's all rising. And one more thing I want to talk about in the US side is weak power demand is really limiting the room for coal and gas in the market. But if coal can survive, that might actually put a squeeze on gas. So if you look at the top right graph, you see that these are the line is the year-on-year growth of electricity demand after adjusting for weather. So basically that line's been hovering around 0 to negative. And what this means is that power demand is not really growing. But if you look at the bottom two graphs, those are a surging wind install in the bottom left chart, and the bottom right is surging solar install. So in fact, in this energy system where if power demand is not growing, so the pie is fixed and shrinking, and then renewable is rising, so that puts a squeeze on coal and gas. And if gas price goes up, then coal will stick around. There's also demand response, continue to reduce the power demand growth as well. And natural gas prices, if you look at the cost curve on the top right graph, looks to be at least pretty stable in the middle part around this kind of high $2 to $3 range. And what that means is that it might actually give, if the long-term price of gas, which we are forecasting about $3 per MBTU, that might be sufficient for at least some coal to stay around for some time. But if gas price were to go down more, it would not only hurt coal, but also hurt renewables. Because if you look at forward power prices, if you look at some of the natural gas price, if you have really no natural gas price, that also makes the case of renewables a little tougher. And a critical part of US gas demand, because when we talk about coal, we cannot not talk about gas. A critical part of US gas demand going forward is really LNG exports. So, and this brings on to about the discussion, short discussion about the international market. So the top left graph shows you a lot of LNG exports coming in the US, at least in the capacity side. And US capacity will make up roughly about 20% of global LNG supply. But before the US capacity hit the global market, if you look at the top right graph, natural gas prices globally have really fallen. So you look at the top line, that's the historical LNG price. So have really fallen from sometimes $20 per MBTU now to about $5. The European price, which is the middle line, also fallen to about $5. And US price, of course, in the $2 to $3 range. But why is this important? So despite falling natural gas price globally, there are two things that work. One is if natural gas price globally falls too far, that will actually shut out US export opportunity, right? So keeping US gas price low, so that might actually be useful in reducing coal demand in the US, because natural gas low prices here to displace coal. But natural gas prices globally is not low enough to displace a lot of coal. So here are what people would call the LCOE, levelized cost of energy, but we like to call it just the total cost, involving the capital, variable costs, and also financing costs. So the top left is the different costs in the US of building new power plants. Now, we are not building new coal-fired power plants in the US, but you can also see that the very top dark line, that's the cost of building a new coal power plant. The top green line is solar costs, unsubsidized. But if you reduce the financing costs, then you see the dotted line, which makes solar much more competitive very soon. And gas and coal would be the two lines down the bottom. So that's the US picture. But if you look at the top right graph, that's a very different picture in developing Asia. If we believe that future demand growth for energy is really in the developing Asia side, then if you look at coal, the cost of building coal-fired generation, and including operating costs, then you are looking at that really dark line is right at the bottom. It's so low that is about 2/3 of the cost of building new unsubsidized wind plants or natural gas power plant. And in fact, also natural gas power plant, this measure is based on a roughly 450 MMBTU global natural gas price. But we know that at that price, you don't build new LNG liquefaction facilities. You need $7, $8, or $9 per MMBTU to build new liquefaction facilities. So therefore, that line, the gray line in the middle on the top right, for the cost of natural gas power plants, that line would actually go up by the middle of the next decade because you need to build new liquefaction facilities. So that means that gas is not competitive with coal, wind not competitive with coal as well. So even though you might have peak coal demand in China already, some would say, historically, people would think that China is synonymous with coal, so as China goes, so go coal. But then if you look at different analysis here, stable economic growth or the sharper economic slowdown, coal demand within the power sector would likely be flat to going down. And that's what we expect. But this is still not enough to make coal decline in terms of demand in the future. So here, the reason is that if you look at this table, these are the top 10 countries or regions that burn coal. 6 to 7 of them are looking to increase coal burn globally. So China and North America certainly a decrease in coal burn, but India is increasing coal burn. Japan might be, depending on nuclear situation. South Africa, Russia, South Korea, Indonesia, Australia. So what that means is that the whole obituary on coal, it might be a little more premature. But this also speaks to where policy and markets differ in what they try to intend the market could result to be. So this is only the top right graph is the coal cost curve, also very flat and coming down as well. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say here is policy have certain goals, but do we have the right policy, the proper policy to steer the market and the energy system to a certain outcome? At least based on the market look right now, the market seems to be saying something different. With that, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tony. That was a great presentation, very rich, a lot of information there. And so we'll come back to lots of questions, but let me just make sure I understood one thing you said. You sort of, looking at the US, not the global market, I mean, we've tended to talk for a while now about the decline of coal, cheap shale gas, coal to gas displacement. Looking forward, in terms of the outlook for coal, can you just make sure people understand again how important the price of gas is versus the price of renewables and that tension and kind of which is going to be the bigger impact in terms of the outlook for coal?
So when you look at the market, natural gas price is extremely important because natural gas prices is highly correlated and affect power price in the future. And how much renewables you build and how much you can hedge in terms of what you build is depending on where your forward power price looks like. So if you have really low power price, low natural gas price, that would drag the forward power price down and might make the economics of renewables a little more challenging. And this low power price certainly would challenge coal-fired generation as well. So if the pie is not getting any bigger in power generation, and you have all these things competing with each other, then if gas price goes lower, then gas has the advantage, right? Displacing or squeezing out other sources. But if gas price were to rise, let's say with a lot more LNG exports, then that might actually provide more room for both renewables and coal. And the question now becomes, where is that gas price, number one? And number two is, how much policy support there might be or policy impact on coal and renewables. So that's where I think the market and the energy system will have to wrestle with, is where the future lies on that.
Great, thanks. And I'll that transition just uses a plug, not just for the Energy Center, but for the great students at SEPA, one of whom, Akos Loj, who's sitting back there, graduated in June and just joined the Energy Center as a research scholar. And we'll have a paper coming out in a couple of weeks about really doing a bottom-up analysis of the competitiveness of U.S. LNG into the global market, both in Europe and in Asia, and what that's going to look like. So I won't spoil the outcome of that, but I think does find that there's still room on a marginal cost basis for U.S. LNG into the global market, but it's a narrow one, and it could easily change based on a number of factors, not least being the oil price. So I'll ask maybe if someone could pull up Professor Gillingham's slides while I introduce him. So our next speaker is Ken Gillingham, Assistant Professor of Economics at Yale, joining us here fresh from the White House, where he was the senior economist for energy and environment on the Council of Economic Advisors. He's back at Yale University now with an appointment at the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, also appointments in the Department of Economics and School of Management, a faculty research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research. And he's been doing a lot of really important and interesting work on a range of energy economic issues, but especially with regard to coal leasing policy and how we think about internalizing the social costs of coal use, and I suspect we'll hear some of that today. He also, I will note, knows coal country, having been before a career as an economist, a wilderness ranger in both Wyoming and New Hampshire. Professor Gillingham, welcome. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't often get that kind of introduction. You must have found that on my website somewhere. I'm going to be talking about the future direction of coal markets, focusing on how policy might be taking it in different directions. So Tony did a really nice job in laying out how there could be a tension between where policy is taking coal and where markets are taking coal, particularly the global side. But I think that plays a role in the United States, too. First, I want to mention, and this came up earlier today as well, that federal coal does in many respects dominate the market. It's a major factor in the direction of the U.S. coal market. So my remarks are going to be focusing on U.S. coal here, and happy to talk during questions about what this means for federal coal. Thank you. So we have two plots here. On the left-hand side, you can see from 1978 to 2013, the Powder River Basin coal as a share of U.S. coal production. So you'll see at the bottom, the blue lines, that's Powder River Basin coal. That's Wyoming and Montana coal. Nearly all of that, over 90% of that, is federal coal. So what you see is this long upward trend, and then it's kind of flattened out for a bit recently. It's a little over 40% of total coal production in the United States is federal coal. Then you can also look on the right-hand side, and this looks at prices. There's a reason why such a large percentage is from the Powder River Basin. It's because it's pretty cheap. So there are a lot of lines there. What I'm going to point to here is the dotted red line. You see it says Wyoming PRB. So that dotted red line at the bottom is the Wyoming Powder River Basin price. So this is the price per short ton of coal. We could adjust it for heat rate because Powder River Basin coal does have a slightly lower heat rate. The graph is going to look extremely similar. What you see there is the lowest is the Wyoming Powder River Basin coal. You can look then above it, and you see a dotted black line. That dotted black line is the U.S. average. That's the U.S. average that includes the Powder River Basin coal. If you exclude it, it'd be even higher. And then you look at the many other lines. These other lines are for all the other states out there that are coal-producing states in the United States. So what you'll see, just to point out again, to reemphasize the point here, is you see this Wyoming Powder River Basin coal, and you see the Montana Powder River Basin coal. They're much below the rest of the United States. They are partly, in many respects, bringing down the U.S. average, and that's the reason why there's such a large share. Now, there are transportation costs. As I said, the heat rate's different, the sulfur content, moisture content. There are other differences. But there are other things that I'm going to point out as well. So this gives the framing that federal coal plays a very large role in this market. And so understanding where this market is, when you want to understand where this market is going, it's very useful to consider how this federal coal is going to be managed. So the Department of Energy, Department of Interior, not Department of Energy this time, the Department of Interior has a 2-year PEIS process, Programmatic Environmental Impact Statement process. It's being run by the Department of Interior in concert with the moratorium on new leases that was mentioned earlier today. This quote was mentioned at the beginning, but I want to re-emphasize 2 key pieces. The Secretary of the Department of Interior, Sally Jewell, on January 15, 2016, says, look, we have not undertaken a comprehensive review of the program in more than 30 years. So they've been using exactly the same regulations to, in how they actually regulate the system in the Powder River Basin and elsewhere for 30 years. And we have an obligation to current and future generations to ensure the federal coal program delivers, in my own emphasis here, a fair return to American taxpayers, and my own emphasis again takes into account its impacts on climate change. So these are the 2 underlying motivations. And what I want to talk about is where these motivations come from, and then what that might mean going forward to how this market might change. The first question is, what is a fair return to American taxpayers? So as a starting point, some of you here are experts on coal, and you know all about how the lands are being managed already. But for those of you who are not, royalties, there are royalties, and this is the largest component of revenues. They're 12.5%. That's actually a minimum statutorily of 12.5%. They're allowed to bring it up at the administrator's, secretary's discretion. 12.5% for surface coal, and set by regulation, 8% for underground coal. And this is based on the first transaction price. And there are also some waivers, although I'm going to argue that waivers actually play a relatively small role. In the Powder River Basin, the average, instead of 12.5%, is about 12.1 or 12.2%. So very rarely are these waivers granted in the very, very large producing areas. There's also a bonus bid auction. The bonus bid's in quotation, that's what it's called. This is an auction for the right to a 20-year lease. And then a very, very small component are the land rental payments. So really, we're talking about royalties and an auction. The purpose of this is to bring in revenue to the federal government, because the federal government owns the land. Why is fair return an issue? And this may come up later today. There's been a whole series of work that's been coming out over the past decade even. A really nice report by GAO, many other reports by nonprofits, by the Center for American Progress. The White House Council of Economic Advisors put together a report that was released in June that points out some of these that have been brought up. Over 90% of these leasing auctions have a single bidder. Why is that? Because they're maintenance auctions. In a sense, they're for maintenance tracks that are adjacent to other tracks. No one else wants to build all the infrastructure to get to those. Most bids come in just above a confidential minimum bid. So in these auction processes, a minimum bid. So most of these bids happen to come in just above the minimum bid, which is supposed to be fair market value. As well, the price of PRB federal coal, Powder River Basin federal coal, is anywhere in the order of 8 to 10. Recently, it was $14 per ton, but in the order of $10 per ton, while the nationwide price is 30 to 40. So in the graph that I showed before, you could see how if 42% roughly of all coal in the United States has a much lower price, that does bring down the nationwide price. PRB coal companies are permitted to sell to affiliates. So if you sell to yourself, in a sense, it's pretty easy to sell at a lower price. This is perfectly legal to do. There are also self-reported washing. Washing just means cleaning the coal before you send it off to be transported. Self-reported washing and transport deductions. So these are, as I said, they're self-reported. The coal companies are allowed, perfectly legal to report their own, and they have to be at least somewhat reasonable. And there are also take-or-pay contracts, which some of you may have heard of, that have low prices and penalty payments. So what this means is that if the first transaction is actually to a power plant, you can sell the coal to the power plant at a very low price, but with a penalty payment if the power plant doesn't buy a whole lot of that coal, more coal than they'd ever be expected to use. And that's also legal. That's held up in the courts. So this is the statutory framework that DOI has been working within. These are all reasons why these are all some of the reasons why there is a PEIS process, why they're trying to think, well, how can it be reformed? What are possible reasonable ways to reform this? And at the end of the day, it comes down to this question of how do we allocate the economic rents from mining? There are economic rents from having this coal it's a resource owned by the federal government. And one question why we even call it fair return to the taxpayer comes down to, well, all of us pay taxes. Can we reduce some of these other taxes or not raise taxes or pay off the debt or use it in other ways? Can we reduce these? And that provides an efficiency gain. So this is why it's an issue. The second criteria was impacts on climate change. Now, there are a variety. I'm going to focus on the social cost of carbon, but you should also consider social cost of methane. You could also consider other environmental impacts, which are also being considered in the PEIS process. It raises the question, so how do we take into account its impacts on climate change? So one thing that they're really kind of quite shocking when you look at this is the question is coal really so cheap? So we have in this plot PRB coal, gas, and oil. The blue lines there are the spot price in 2015 adjusted for heat rate, recognizing that the heat rate of Powder River Basin coal is lower than in many other coal areas. So there you see the spot price for PRB coal, for gas, for oil. Then we have the monetized climate damages. This is from the social cost of carbon, converted to MMBTU. It's using the standard mean social cost of carbon at a 3% discount rate, the one that's used most commonly, right around $40 per ton of CO2. What you see here, climate damages from PRB coal are 6 times greater than the market value of coal. Very, very large.
Can you just remind people what the social cost of carbon
Yes,
is in
the
a
social
second?
cost of carbon is the monetized value of damages for a ton of CO2 that's emitted into the atmosphere, both today and going out into the future. So it's the discounted, so out to today, it's today's dollars monetized value of the carbon damages. And I could get into how it's calculated, but this is a very good metric that's being used in regulations. It's already been used in over 40 rulemakings in the United States government. So this gives you a quick view of how those climate damages compare to the spot price. Another way to look at it is how they compare relative to the climate cost. So here we have gas, oil, and PRB coal. You can see where the royalties are. These are, again, in terms of dollars per MMBTU. So what we have here for gas, for oil, for coal, these are other areas that the federal government manages resources. We again see the climate costs, and this is just the standard social cost of carbon. Again, the climate cost is well, well, well above the royalty rate in a way that just dominates what's going on in the other two. So these are all reasons why Sally Jewell said, hey, this is an area where we should spend a little time thinking about whether there are different ways that this should be managed. And I think it's a pretty strong case. Now, taking into account the impacts of climate change is not so simple. We've been having a lot of conversations today about how the markets interact and what's been going on, especially with renewables and with natural gas. One of the key features is how do markets re-equilibrate if you did, say, raise the royalty rate? So one key question is substitution. Do we just shift production to non-federal coal? So if we raise the royalty rates on federal coal, so just think about it as Powder River Basin coal dominates federal coal. Say we just shifted it just on Powder River Basin coal. What would happen? How much would be shifted to Illinois Basin, to Appalachian coal? Or to Powder River Basin coal, there's a very small amount on Indian lands and non-federal lands as well. How much production is shifted? That's one key question. And the second key question is, are there interactions with other climate policies? What if we're already accounting for climate damages when we're already doing so? With the Clean Power Plan, which was talked about before, many local policies, RPSs, is there going to be a double counting going on? We did see earlier today from BNEF that the estimated forecasted 2030 carbon price in many of the states in the US was very, very low from the Clean Power Plan. That would indicate that there's a lot of room here to raise royalty rates and still be efficient, but you have to be careful not to double count. So there's some latest evidence on this. So some work by Jim Stock at Harvard and his PhD student has some modeling about raising the royalty rates. So what if we raised royalty rates to incorporate the mean social cost of carbon, about $40 per ton? That actually is almost effectively the same as keeping it in the ground. Now that would be double counting if you already have a very strong climate policy already that's downstream, like the Clean Power Plan say that that's a very strong downstream. You wouldn't want to necessarily double count. You need to be careful about that. But if you actually raised it to the social cost of carbon, that basically shuts down to a very, very small amount coal production on federal lands. And there would be considerable leakage to non-federal coal. So production goes up in Appalachia and other places. What if we raise royalty rates to provide a 20% carbon adder? So here you have a 20% social cost of carbon. So instead of the entire social cost of carbon in the 20% of it, you'd have much less leakage, much less concern about double counting. What you'd see is with the Clean Power Plan, you'd have some modest climate effects. It reduces the compliance costs of the Clean Power Plan. And if you have very, very low cost renewables, such as in some of the BNEF forecasts, it could become a binding policy. But it also provides a backstop. So suppose the Clean Power Plan did not hold up in court. Then the climate effects become much, much larger. And the logic here justifies increasing the carbon adder even further potentially. But other things that would occur, Eastern Midwestern coal production and employment rise somewhat. So Mitch McConnell would be very happy in Kentucky. And royalty revenues could increase by $3 billion annually in the mid to late 2020s, $35 billion through 2030. Right now, the way that royalties are divvied up is they're split evenly between the states and roughly evenly between the states and the federal government. So you could give half to the affected states. You could give half of the additional carbon adder to the affected states. And the net impact on states, of course, requires assessing severance and sales taxes. Some quick calculations we do show that the additional royalty revenues would far dominate the loss in severance and sales taxes. And the remaining stream could be available for funding coal community transition programs, perhaps in the Powder River Basin, but also elsewhere. So some final thoughts are, I want to really point out that when we're thinking about coal leasing moving forward and the considerations that I think personally are useful to consider when you're working on reforms of the coal leasing system, first of all, in the fair return, it's really about who gets the economic rent. So it's an equity question. And there's a long precedent in the federal government of the federal government taking in a lot of the rents from property that's owned by the federal government. But you could also argue that the miners who are doing all the hard work of taking the coal out of the ground should also get a share of rents. But if it offsets distortionary taxes, it can improve economic efficiency. And then the climate considerations. It's the second best approach in absence of perfect carbon pricing that we all, as economists, dream about. But you have these twin issues of substitution and interactions with downstream climate policy. The work so far indicates that these would not be a problem for a relatively modest carbon adder. So I argue for modestly increasing royalty rates with the carbon adder as a way to, if you want to improve efficiency. And it could also help equity by providing some funding for hard-hit coal communities making an economic transition. With that, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ken. I saw some hands, so we will have a lot of time for questions because we left a big chunk of time for this panel. So maybe someone could bring up Ted's slides, and while they're doing that, Ken, let me just ask you a quick follow-up to make sure I understood. You talked about how changing the royalty rates could sort of act as a backstop in case Clean Power Plan got overturned in the courts or something like that. And then you also, I think, noted that if you had, let's say, the full social cost of carbon, certainly it's effectively the same as just continuing the moratorium. So if you were to have a moratorium, if you said no more coal leasing on federal lands or even social cost of carbon or some fraction of it, but then you said there was considerable leakage. So when I saw the phrase considerable leakage, I thought that was leading to a place where you said, really what we therefore need to do is focus on national policies, whether they're regulatory, the Clean Power Plan, national price on carbon. But you sort of ended up saying, no, actually we do want to focus on imposing some, if not all, some portion of the social cost of carbon. And why did you end up there, notwithstanding the considerable leakage you talked about, which just may mean that you're actually not changing prices and demand for coal that much, you're just getting your coal from different places and getting less revenue to the federal government for it.
I think that's a great point. I did not at all intend to say that we should not have national policy. By all means, I think we should have national policy, and then that would be a wonderful thing to do, and let's get a Congress that'll do it, and I'd be very, very happy with that. So I immediately jumped in my ending slide about this second best world that I believe that we're in, that what can we do that's under current existing statutory authority that would actually improve efficiency and improve the environment, and that's where I left off.
Great. All right, we'll come back to that in the Q&A. So our final presentation, Ted O'Brien is the CEO of Doyle Trading Consultants, a boutique energy research firm that specializes in the coal sector. He joined the firm in 2007, assumed the role of president in 2011, CEO in 2014. He's a member of the North Carolina Coal Institute, the New York Coal Trade Association, serves on its board of governors, so he knows the coal industry quite well and how people think about financing in the coal sector. And let me turn it over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we look at the market from a different perspective as many of you, so just so you understand what we do, we produce fundamental supply-demand analysis, forecasting, do a lot of consulting to not only the industry but the financial community. So, you know, we don't get paid to have a certain view. We do take views based on what we're seeing in the fundamentals, and that's what I'll talk about a bit today. So I'm not going to argue with any of the longer-term views that coal has a pretty tough outlook, particularly in the U.S., given the lack of investment in any new demand outlets. But in the shorter term, I think the outlook is actually a bit more favorable. And it's really coming off a very, very rough 5-year stretch. So, you know, over the next couple of years, better days are to come. I'll walk through our supply demand a little bit, talk about the export market and why we think the U.S. coal market's actually setting up for a nice price spike into 2017, 2018. I'll talk a little bit about the capital structures, the restructuring the industry just went through, and I'll try and be quick in doing that. So this is our supply-demand forecast. Obviously, a lot of numbers, don't expect anybody to take any of it in, but you can review it once the slides are circulated. If you look under the red arrow, that's our 2016 forecast. This year, we're forecasting U.S. supply down 22% year over year. Just completely unfathomable to see that much supply cut in an industry that has so much capital involved in getting coal out of the ground. On the demand side, down 126 million tons, down 14%. Two main demand outlets, utility demand, we forecast down 100 million tons due to nat gas renewables. Exports down 22 million tons just due to weak pricing and strong U.S. dollar. So without a doubt, 2016 has been a very tough year for the industry. But if you were to take it in perspective as to the last 5 years, it's really highlights just how bad it's been. Since 2011, total U.S. coal supply down 36%, total utility demand down 32%, exports down 52%. This is without question the worst 5-year, 6-year stretch the industry's ever had to deal with. And while there have been oversupplied markets in the past, there had been a growing utility demand base to bail the industry out. So coal's really been hit on all fronts, but we're now at a point where supply cuts are finally outpacing the demand destruction. Demand can change a lot quicker than supply, change based on weather, based on natural gas. And the industry itself was very slow to react. There was a lot of hope that things would get better, natural gas would rally, weather would normalize. And they finally got to a point where they ran out of money, went into bankruptcy, and this year it's really dealing with the impact of all of the supply cuts that should have happened over the last 3 years. Why is it going to get better next year? First and foremost, natural gas. Without a doubt, natural gas holds the key to the future of U.S. coal consumption. This graph shows the net monthly coal consumption gains and losses due to gas switching. Below the x-axis is a loss, and you can see that it's just coal's been obliterated from gas over the last, really 2-3 years. Over the last 12 months, coal consumption has fallen 717 million tons from gas displacement. Every region's been hit. PRB down 55, Illinois Basin down 19 million tons, NAP down 13 million tons. But these losses are about to, and they're really starting to reverse right now. You have prompt gas north of 275, the 2018 strip about 310. So you're actually seeing coal generation that's finally back in the money after a very tough stretch. The table on this graph has the output from our coal versus natural gas generation model. We're looking at the real-time generation costs. Is it more economic to generate power from a coal unit or a gas unit? And right now, coal generation is theoretically in the money for Northern App coal in PJM West, Illinois Basin, in the Midwest, PRB, and ERCOT. And not only is that the case for prompt, but it's the case for the futures market. So if you're a utility, you have access to both coal and gas units. You could be hedging power forward to lock in profit on your coal units for the next year. We talked a little bit about utility stockpiles earlier, but stockpiles have been growing to a point that they really haven't ever been in recent history, north of 110 days of supply at many plants throughout the U.S. And utilities typically want somewhere 45 to 55 days on the ground. So that's a huge buffer. And even though we're starting to see demand pick up, utilities haven't been in the market to buy new supply because they have to work through the stockpiles. Assuming we have normal weather this winter, coal burn is going to pick up. Deliveries, while they're higher than they were in April, they're still well below year-over-year levels. And you're going to see stockpiles fall pretty dramatically. Sometime Q1, Q2 of next year, utilities are going to enter the market to buy coal for calendar year 2018, and they're going to see that supply is dramatically underperforming what their demand consumption will be. And I really think you're going to see a pretty dramatic price spike, which could potentially bring more supply into the market. So the U.S. market's rebounding based on natural gas. Internationally, prices are going through an unprecedented spike. These graphs have prices for hard coking coal, thermal coal, and they were updated on Friday, and they're already out of date. The most recent price point as of last week for coking coal was $140 per metric ton. Today we had it traded $190 per metric ton. So it's total parabolic price gains, and it's really pushing the U.S. to the potential to export more coal. The biggest driver in the international market right now is China. The Chinese government saw a lot of the state-owned enterprises incurring pretty significant losses over the last 3 years as coal prices fell. And the government came out early this year, mandated production cuts. You can see coal production from January to July down 12% year over year. This is by far the largest coal market, so such a dramatic reduction was unexpected. And that's forced Chinese buyers to enter the seaborne market to buy more imported coal. And while it looks like China might be easing some of the production constraints in the near term, they are supporting the market. And the question from the U.S. as the swing global supplier to the seaborne market, will the coal be available to export as prices imply that U.S. should be ramping up its exports? Just to highlight what's happening in coking coal, I mean, it's totally unprecedented. 2 months ago, we had pricing settled for the July to September quarter at $92.50. Today, we had it traded $190 per metric ton. So again, this is all FOB Australia, hasn't quite boiled over to the Atlantic Basin, but you have some supply outages in Australia, and it's caught a lot of buyers by surprise. We have an improving market backdrop for the U.S. industry, just as the U.S. suppliers are starting to emerge from bankruptcy. Now, I think a common misconception in the market is that natural gas and regulation pushed the industry into bankruptcy. It really was completely the result of very highly levered acquisitions as the producers were looking to diversify away from thermal coal. They saw the writing on the wall with regulation, with natural gas. They wanted to enhance their exposure to coking coal. And if you look at this, the top graph, that's the annually, quarterly coking coal contract price. And in that red circle, you had 4 major deals from U.S. Coal producers acquiring coking coal assets, $26 billion, almost completely funded by debt at the exact top of the market. As prices fell, they were incredibly exposed. They had a bit of leeway with the lenders for 2-3 years, but that all came to a head last year, and that's why the industry is going through the restructuring it is. We're starting to see the other side of the restructuring with Alpha having recently emerged and chatter that some of their peers are on their way to emerge. And the only thing that's changing is the capital structure. You're seeing a lot of debt written off. These companies are emerging into what looks like it'll be a better market for the next couple of years with manageable capital structures, and they're backed and supported by investors that have sunk a bunch of money into the industry over the last 5 years, and they want an out. So it looks like for the first time in a while, the U.S. industry will have some support from the market, and it'll be interesting to see what happens as the producers emerge. So, to wrap up, longer term, the lack of new consumption outlets being built in the U.S. is a big headwind. But over the next couple of years, I think the U.S. coal market is setting up for a pretty nice pop. Internationally, long-term demand growth will be driven by the Pacific Basin, countries like, India, Japan, but also smaller countries like Malaysia, Vietnam, Philippines. These are all big coal consumers that are growing, and some of them are actually shifting from net exporters to net importers as their own demand internally grows. So with that, I thank you, and I look forward to questions on the panel.
Thank you. So I think I'm going to skip my follow-up question so we can open it up. And the first thing I want to do, the first person I'm going to ask if we could hear from, I'm actually going to take moderator prerogative to expand the size of the panel by one and ask one audience member to join us up here for this Q&A part. I'll go stand by the podium because we have one of the top White House officials on energy who came up to attend this, Ali Zaidi, who's the Associate Director for Natural Resources, Energy, and Science at the White House Office of Management and Budget, leads a very large team of people implementing a roughly $100 billion budget on all the administration's energy and climate policies, and is one of the core members of the team in the White House that is implementing Obama's energy and climate agenda. So it's great. I appreciate your traveling from DC, and I wanted to ask Ali to just come sit here for a minute and offer a few reflections on behalf of the administration to what you heard today, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience.
Great. Well, thank you, Jason, and thanks to all of the speakers today who I think have done just a tremendous job of weaving together the nuanced context around this incredibly challenging set of issues that are presented in this part of the market. 3 reflections quickly. First, folks earlier, I think, talked to and referenced the importance of investing in communities and human capital in individuals, the sort of minor communities that are being that are on the front edge of some of the transition that's taking place in the energy markets. I think it's important to recognize, and both Howard and Ken's graphs show how much of what we're talking about now going forward is a Western play. A lot of the places where we're talking about doing reinvestment is actually an Eastern play. And so I think that's an interesting political economy dynamic in terms of ginning up support for investment. That makes it complicated. But the administration's advanced a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar plan to really invest in these communities. That includes putting folks to work in reclaiming the land that has been abandoned post-development of the mines. That's $1 billion over 5 years. We're already starting to put down payments towards that work. It includes shoring up the health and pension plans for 100,000 miners and their families. So there is a critical piece that I think sits outside of the market discussion largely because oftentimes these transitions are actually out of the energy business. But I remember sitting around the table with the president, we were talking about the budget, and one of the things he said was, this is just the responsible thing to do. We gotta get it, we gotta go push for this. So that's sort of where we come from on the human capital side. There are 2 places that that we need to also invest in. The first is technology. know some of the modeling underlying Ken's work. Some of it I don't know. But one of the things we know from the technology side is that the Department of Energy thinks it's possible within a decade, maybe within this decade, to be able to get to $40 a ton capture as we sort of transition to Gen 2 CCS technology. When the president went to Paris and he signed a big climate deal, and I'm sure that put some downward pressure on the market, he also signed up for a doubling commitment for clean energy R&D, which is why we budgeted $600 million for the coming year in R&D earlier stage, as well as proposed $2 billion in tax incentives to demo that technology. But if we can accelerate the pace of getting to that $40 or maybe even lower, I think all of a sudden some of the modeling and the projections change, and the effective keep it in the ground, depending on your price of carbon, actually changes dramatically. So there is a wrench to the model, and I think it's important to recognize that's a place where we spend a bunch of money. We've seen a bunch of progress, and we're continuing to lean in. And then the last is just sort of the investment in policy innovation. Ken talked about it a little bit in terms of updating rules of the road that had been around since the late 70s, early 80s at DOI. But there are other rules that we've been updating around the federal government. That includes coal finance in the development context. Folks paying attention to the G20 saw that there's continued attention from the major economies in making sure that where possible, we're pushing the envelope on sustainability. So I think collectively the sort of bottom line for the administration is I think there's a lot of hope and optimism that we can create jobs and opportunity for the communities that, frankly, for decades have been going through a transition as a result of the shift first out of Appalachia and now out of coal. Second, that there's actually a great technology play that's both critical to the United States but incredibly important for the rest of the world on CCS, which also has huge spillover benefits for biomass and natural gas. And third, that we've got to update our policies to take into account the fact that we know we're causing climate change, and we have the tools and the political will, not everywhere we need, but the political will in lots of quarters to try to do something about it. So appreciate the opportunity to join this august panel.
Thanks for jumping in and offering some reflections on behalf of the administration. So I want to open it up to questions from the audience. We have microphones to go around. I think what I'll try to do is maybe take 3 questions at a time and give the panel a chance to respond, and that way we can get as many in as possible. There's a hand, and if people could introduce themselves, and please keep your questions brief so we get as many in as possible. I don't know if we have 2 microphones. If not, if there is, you can bring the next one on the aisle here so we can be ready to go.
Hi, Richard Reevey from Cloud Peak Energy. This is for Professor Gillingham. You spoke extensively about one component of government returns on PRB coal, i.e. the royalty rate. Why do you not speak about the actual total government revenue yield on a ton of PRB coal, which is 40%? And my other question is, you seem to think the federal royalty rate is relatively low. How does it compare to non-federal royalty rates in the U.S. and to royalty rates in major coal-producing countries around the world?
Right. There was a question on the aisle here, and was there another one we can bring the microphone to right over here in front of you, right over there? Yeah, please.
Yeah, hi, this is Jeff Buller from Spectrum Group Management. This is a question for Ted O'Brien. You had mentioned earlier in your discussion about $192 per metric ton of coking coal trades as recently as today or yesterday. I was wondering if you could expand on that and why the price has shot up and what the market implications are for that.
And take a third question there and then let people respond.
Andrew Warrant, Hudson Ridge. Since October of 2013, the discount for natural gas in Appalachia, because of oversupply and not enough pipeline exit capacity, has been a substantial discount to Henry Hub, as much as $1.25. if you look at the announced pipeline capacity through 2019, it's over 40 BCF a day, which would take that $1.20 and drop it to perhaps 50 cents. And even if you look forward into the forward curve, you see that already tightening. Under conservative assumptions, that would actually increase coal burns by about 50 million tons per year by 2019. So I wanted to have, see if you had any comment on that.
Great. So we'll just take those in order. Ken, there was a question about sort of how to think about royalty rates and whether they're high or low.
Sure, yeah. The first question is, why did I focus on the royalty rate rather than the overall amount that goes to the government? Well, first of all, the royalty rate is the largest chunk. Because of that, so many of the, because people would argue that the bidding is not all that competitive, 90% of the bonus bid auctions have a single bidder for obvious reasons, right? Because they're maintenance tracks. Because of that, really royalty rates is the place to look for anything that's too interesting. And so given that the largest fraction is the royalty rate, it's the one that's most interesting. There was a 40% number that was mentioned as a total, so the royalty rates would have been a very large chunk of that. And then the second question was comparing this to non-federal royalty rates or royalty rates around the world. So in many other places, there are severance taxes that states have, or many other approaches, and they vary across the board. The main point to be taken here is this is a question of their economic rents. The companies in the Powder River Basin are very good at taking out coal. They're really efficient. In fact, the amount of coal extracted per manpower is incredibly high there. And so the question is, how are those economic rents to be distributed? And so just looking at where other royalty rates, what they have been, doesn't really answer the core question of how should these economic rents be distributed. So I almost see that as a non-issue.
Ted, there was a question for you about the price run-up.
Sure. So the $190 trade happened this morning, and it's it's slowly climbed, but it's been just incredible. A couple things behind it. First and foremost, going into this year, the industry, the market expected Chinese coking coal imports to contract from like 46 million tons last year to maybe 42 million tons this year. Right now, their annualized run rate's like 53 million tons. So that's like an 11, 12 million ton delta versus industry expectations in a market that was already getting pretty tight. So you've had buyers since prices started to climb up. A few buyers were on the sidelines waiting for prices to fall again. They've been caught short. You've had a few production hiccups in Queensland and New South Wales, which has really tightened up available supply. And then 2 days ago, you had a longwall or a roof fall at one of South 32, which is a BHP spinoff. Their coking coal mines in New South Wales. And from what I hear, they issued force majeures for September, October. So if you were a buyer expecting that cargo, you're now forced to jump into the market, try and find a cargo in a very tight supply environment. So it's been parabolic. I don't expect the market to stay anywhere near this level. Last time I was this high was 4 years ago. The Aussie dollar was trading at parity with the US dollar. So a lot of reasons it won't stay here, but it's been phenomenal in the meantime.
And then there was a question about discounts on the gas price, gas pipeline takeaway capacity, and what that might do to coal use. Howard?
Right, so I think that's right. Obviously, again, going back to the theme of a lot of this is in specific regions, and the specific regional situation matters. I didn't focus on it, but in fact, in our kind of the baseline view that I presented, we had coal generation rising a little bit over the next few years, although in the long run, with the Clean Power Plan, that starts to take an effect later on. And again, on the dispatch, of coal, existing coal versus existing gas, that's going to be very, very price sensitive. And there's no question that the Appalachian, prices have been depressed by the stuff not being gas prices have been depressed by the stuff not being able to move out. And, we definitely see that closing up.
So I just want to make sure I understand, is the consequence of that in order to see greater declines in coal, we need to build out more gas pipeline capacity? Obviously, new gas pipelines are a controversial thing.
Well, that in this case, building out gas pipeline capacity raises the price of gas in the Marcellus, because almost all the increase in gas production recently has been Utica and Marcellus. and there's not a lot of takeaway that run, they're building takeaway to the south. There are lots of projects proposed. They won't all be built. They're competing with each other to some extent. But as that imbalance between production and takeaway, the basis differential between the Marcellus and the Henry Hub will narrow, and one effect of that will be directionally to make coal somewhat more competitive in the Marcellus than it would be under the present situation. I mean, gas prices are still, I mean, the main thing is the level of gas prices, but it's not just the national number. That was the issue this morning. You know, show you what the national Henry Hub price is, and that's not what's necessarily driving this.
Tony, quickly, and then we'll open it up for more.
So I think that 40 BCF per day number on pipeline expansion, I think that's perhaps include intra-regional. And we only count maybe about, 10 to 15 BCF a day of gas pipeline capacity, actually taking gas out of the Northeast, and that's what mattered, right? And given that there's substantial delays and some cancellation of those pipes, so it would take some time for that to happen. So that basis differential would continue to stay wide, and even if it closes, so the forward look at the basis differential might be a little too optimistic right now, and if indeed it closes to around 50 cents per MBTU, assuming $3 Henry Hub price, you're still looking at $2.50 roughly for Dominion South Point. Call it, Northeast production area price. $2.50 gas price equate to about $20 per megawatt hour in marginal cost generation. And that means that you need coal prices to be in the $40 per ton, somewhere around there. And, if indeed coal prices, is not sustainable, $40 per ton, then, coal prices will have to be higher, then coal is still hurt. And power demand is not growing either. So I think that the coal demand rebound in the eastern side would be, I would be less optimistic than the number of 50 million tons, if there's a strong rebound at all.
Thanks. Questions? There's one here. If we could bring the microphone up front. And then maybe you can give the next question over here.
More than one question allowed.
We're going to do 3 and give them a chance to answer. No, so let's do one question per person, please.
Okay. I guess just on LNG, if as the LNG market sort of develops and capabilities come online, do you see that maybe contracts will be structured differently and a move away from sort of pricing-based oil index pricing, and therefore that could be a driver of higher nat gas and therefore affect coal prices as well?
Yep, Stephen Birkenfeld.
There was another question back there. If you could pass the microphone back maybe to the gentleman.
And this question is a little delicate, but for the administration, and it's not there alone. We hear a lot of having to do things to protect the coal communities. And I'm wondering, and I agree it's the right thing to do, but it's unusual that it's somewhat unprecedented. There's lots of industries that have been disrupted by government policy and regulation or technology, and there isn't the same focus on helping the communities, right? The big push on fuel efficiency standards, which will push us to electrification, but nobody's talking about what do we do for gas station owners or oil-producing regions. When we said we have a policy against tobacco, we didn't think about tobacco communities. As we allow self-driving trucks, we're not saying we've got to deal with all the truck drivers, which is one of the leading professions or leading jobs in the country in like half the states. So again, understanding and having the view that's the right thing to do, it seems as though we're treating coal communities in a way that's different than anything that's happened before in the U.S. or anything that's contemplated going forward as we shift all these other policies that will have maybe a bigger impact in terms of displacement of jobs.
Hi, Mark Scolacci, University of Colorado Law School. I had a question primarily for Ken, I guess, about coal leasing. And I'm just wondering, in terms of your projections of revenues from increased royalties, do you assume new coal leasing, new federal coal leasing, that's going to sort of allow us to set higher royalty rates? And I ask it in part because I haven't looked at the data recently, but I believe there's about a 20-year backlog of supply under existing federal leases that, at least for the term of the lease, which I think is 20 years, is probably going to be subject to the existing royalty rates. And so I'm just wondering how that might affect your calculations and if it's built into your analysis.
Great, thank you. We could have a whole session, and in fact, we've had many of them at the Energy Center on the future of LNG pricing and oil indexation, and we have a study on Asian LNG prices coming out soon. So, but very quickly, do you want to comment on that?
Very quickly, yes, oil indexation will break because spot prices are much lower than oil index prices. And whether it will affect U.S. gas price, yes, it will affect U.S. gas price if U.S. export more, but the world is so oversupplied with LNG that there might not be as much U.S. LNG exports, which in turn lower the U.S. gas price. Lowering the U.S. gas price would actually go back to what we talk about, lower power prices, which affects renewables built and affect economics of coal-fired generation. So we are less optimistic on the LNG front.
Ali, maybe I'll give the next one to you. Is it a public policy concern if coal communities are adversely affected?
Sure it is. First, I think there is actually a pretty long history of investment in communities that have been disrupted because of either significant sectoral changes in the economy or policy changes. And what you're seeing here is actually both of those things beating up on communities, and in particular on communities that have been going through a transition for decades now, and have been, a lot of those communities are persistent poverty communities for decades now. One example of that is the Trade Adjustment Act related assistance that was authorized, I think, for the first time in 1974, and has helped a countless number of communities and countless number of individuals get retrained. In this administration alone, we invested $2 billion through the Trade Adjustment Act community college training grants for a lot of folks who, because of sectoral changes in the economy or policy-driven changes in the economy, needed to get retrained, needed to get back to work. So that's one example. I think the second example is there are a set of policies that we've pursued where we've seen positive or sort of upside gain to be had in the economy. That's things like the new markets tax credit that have been highly successful. You raised the example of the auto communities. The administration, actually at the beginning of the administration, set up an auto communities task force that took the same sort of programs that we're talking about here, EPA brownfields programs, showed up in places that were getting shuttered down and turned them back on for a new economy. So that's precisely a playbook that has worked for the U.S., and that's what's allowed us to keep taking advantage of the rich human capital that we have and grow the economy. So that's sort of point number one. And then point number two is, the Appalachian region and the ARC, the Appalachian Region Commission, has been around for decades, has been, for a host of reasons, a place of persistent poverty in the United States. And there is a tremendous public policy rationale for us to be doing the most that we can for the most vulnerable in our country, setting aside energy policy and market changes. So I think the combination of a playbook that works and a set of values that I think we share as a country really drive us to take on this responsibility, regardless of whether we get political credit for it or not.
Ken, a question about whether the large backlog of existing leases affects how you think about changes in the royalty rate.
Sure, absolutely. But first I'll add on one more example to Ali's is tobacco communities with the tobacco settlement, and that may be even equally relevant or perhaps even more relevant because it's focused on very, very particular regions of the country that were very heavy tobacco growing areas. There was a huge amount of money that went in for retraining and a variety of other things. So there's a lot of precedence there as well. But it was Mark's question was a really excellent question, and that is built into the modeling. So the assumption is that any new leases that are being made along the way are going to be facing the new royalty rate. Existing leases will keep theirs. The assumption is, though, that at renewal we'll have the statutory ability to change the royalty rates. That's perhaps up in the air. I'm not trained in law, so I don't know the details of that. But, certainly after 10 years, you're going to be having all of the new ones with those higher royalty rates, and that kind of basically is phased in throughout the model runs. So by 2030, 2035, you're really getting the full hit of the higher royalties, and those are the numbers that I was reporting. Great question.
Great, thank you. So we have our coffee break now, but that also means you have 15 minutes to come up here and corner the panelists and not let them go to coffee. You can, they'll be up here for additional questions. Please join me in thanking our great panel for the conversation.